Welcome to the channel Mirelle Tales. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into today's story.
At 11 p.m., my husband slapped me because there was no food on the table. He screamed, "Hurry up and serve dinner, you useless woman." I walked in and out of the kitchen for 20 minutes without saying a word. When I returned with a covered tray, they thought it would be a delicious meal, but when the lid was lifted, there was no food inside but a one-way ticket to hell for them. The clock on the living room wall read 1110 p.m. Outside the house, an absolute silence reigned. The only sound was the tires of my car crunching on the asphalt of the parking lot. I felt like my whole body was about to break. I had spent the entire day at the office wrestling with a mountain of audit documents that had to be ready by the next morning. A throbbing pain pulsed in my head as if a hammer were striking it repeatedly, but I forced a faint smile imagining the soft bed that would soon welcome me. I just wanted a hot shower and an uninterrupted night's sleep. I turned off the car engine and staggered toward the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which was trembling slightly from exhaustion. As the door opened, the cold blast of the air conditioner hit me straight in the face. It was strange. Normally, the living room lights would be off at this hour, but tonight every lamp was blazing. I suddenly had a bad feeling. My steps halted on the threshold as I saw three people sitting on the living room sofa with indecipherable expressions. My husband, Matt, was sitting in the center, his legs crossed arrogantly. To his right, my mother-in-law, Sharon, shot me a sharp, judgmental glare, and to his left, my sister-in-law, Tiffany, was fiddling with her phone, though she occasionally glanced at me with a mocking smirk. Before I could even say hello, Matt leaped up and strode towards me. His face was beet red, his jaw tight. Seeing the veins bulge in his neck, I knew his emotions were about to erupt. "Honey, I just got home from work." Before I could finish the sentence, a hard slap landed on my left cheek. Smack. The sound was so loud it shattered the silence of the living room. Instantly, a stinging, burning sensation spread across my face. The slap was so forceful my head snapped to the side. I froze on the spot. The exhaustion that had weighed down my entire body seemed to vanish in the face of the tremendous impact. My right hand, clutching my increasingly numb cheek, trembled. I looked at Matt, trying to find a hint of guilt in his eyes, but there was none, only a glint of fury about to explode. "Do you know what time it is, you cheap bitch?" Matt yelled right in my face, his spit spraying my hair. "Who do you think you are, coming home this late? What are you doing out there? While your husband is waiting at home." I swallowed the tears that were fighting to escape. "Honey, I was working late. You know, it's the end of the month, and I'm busy. I had a lot of work. Besides, I texted you this afternoon," I replied, my voice trembling but trying to remain calm. I didn't want to show weakness in front of them. Sharon cut me off with a sharp voice. The middle-aged woman stood up from the sofa and pointed a finger at my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been here starving for an hour. There isn't a single plate of food on the table. The pots are empty, and the fridge has nothing but cold water. Are you trying to starve my son and his family on purpose?" "Huh." Tiffany chimed in without looking up from her phone screen, as if I were less important than a social media video. "Get a clue, sister-in-law. Matt's been tired all day, just relaxing at home. A wife should pick up groceries on her way home from work or cook something." "How can you come home empty-handed? You're useless." I looked at them one by one. Matt, my unemployed husband, who lied to the neighbors, telling them he'd started a business after being fired 6 months ago for embezzling company funds. Sharon, my mother-in-law, who demanded thousands of dollars from me each month for her expenses without ever lifting a single dirty plate in this house. And Tiffany, my 5-year-old sister-in-law, whose only job was to sleep, eat, and shop online with my supplementary credit card. All of them lived off my sweat. All of them breathed under the roof of this house whose mortgage I paid every month. And now they were screaming at me because I came home late to make them dinner. "Go cook already, you useless woman," Matt shouted again. This time he shoved me hard by the shoulder, sending me stumbling backward into the shoe rack. "And don't you dare come out of that kitchen until there's a delicious meal on the table. And it better be good, or I'll throw the plates in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rage that was beginning to burn in my chest. I wanted to scream, to vomit all the anger I had been holding in, to throw them out of my house right this second. But no, acting on impulse would ruin my plan. I needed to stay calm to exact my revenge in the most painful way for them. An elegant revenge they would never forget. I straightened up and fixed my disheveled hair. I looked Matt directly in the eyes. There was no longer a trace of fear or sadness in me, only a cold, empty gaze. "All right," I said. in a low but firm voice. "You're hungry, wait 20 minutes. I'll prepare a special dish for you tonight. The one you deserve the most." Without waiting for their reply, I walked past Matt, ignoring Sharon's sneer and Tiffany's sarcastic laugh. I went straight to the kitchen, the place where I used to spend hours serving them like a maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight this kitchen wouldn't produce the aroma of delicious food. Tonight this kitchen would be the place where I cooked their ruin. As soon as I entered the kitchen, I shut the door firmly. Leaning my back against it, I closed my eyes for a moment to gather my strength. The sting on my cheek persisted, but the wound in my heart was far more painful. For 5 years of marriage, I had always tried to be a devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Matt's laziness. I tried to understand Sharon's complaints and gave in to Tiffany's immature behavior. I thought if I was patient, they would change. I was completely wrong. My patience had only fed the monster within them. They grew greedier, crueler, and more shameless. I opened my eyes. The tears I had held back had completely dried up. It wasn't worth crying over parasites like them. I went to a drawer in a corner of the kitchen, the place where I had kept important things I had been hiding. Enough is enough. This pathetic drama had to end tonight. I deliberately made noise, clattering a knife against the cutting board. Chop, 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 chop. The rhythm filled the kitchen and seeped through the walls to the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were probably smiling smugly, thinking I had bent to their will again. They'd think that foolish wife was frantically chopping onions or meat to fill their demanding stomachs, scared to death. But on the kitchen counter, not a single ingredient was touched. The large chef's knife was just repeatedly hitting an empty cutting board. It was part of the show. I wanted them to feel on top of the world before I plunged them into the deepest abyss. While I continued making fake noises, my other hand was busy preparing the real dinner. I took out a large silver platter, one I normally used only for special family occasions. The platter gleamed under the kitchen light. On it, I didn't place plates of rice or side dishes. There was no pot roast, no mashed potatoes, no steak as they often demanded. Instead, I took a thick envelope from a secret drawer under the sink. An envelope I had been preparing for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. I opened the envelope and took out 3 important documents. First, the deed to this house. I had originally bought this house with my own savings, but Matt had insisted I put his name on it as a co-owner to feel respected as the head of the family. However, last month, after paying off the final mortgage payment with my year-end bonus, I secretly started the process of transferring the title completely into my name. The process was complex and costly, but fortunately I knew a trusted lawyer who could get it done quickly and without Matt finding out. This document was proof that every brick, every tile, and every inch of this property was mine. Second, the divorce petition. This document was already filed and stamped. It detailed the grounds for divorce, verbal abuse, the physical violence that had just occurred, thankfully recorded by the security camera I had installed in the living room a week ago, and financial abandonment. I was done supporting a man who only knew how to give orders. Third, a stack of bank statements as thick as a notebook. On them, I had highlighted with a bright fluorescent marker every single transaction that left my account to support their lifestyle. The payments for Matt's SUV, the monthly allowance Sharon used for her social club meetings, the charges on my supplementary credit card that Tiffany used to buy designer bags and shoes, and even the money for Matt's cigarettes and gas. It was all meticulously recorded. The grand total was astronomical enough to buy a small condo on the outskirts of the city. It was irrefutable proof that I was the head of this family, not Matt. I placed these 3 documents neatly on the platter, the deed in the center, the divorce petition on the left, and the bank statements on the right. Then I covered it with a gleaming silver dome lid. Perfect. At first glance, it looked like a fancy dinner from a 5-star restaurant. I glanced at my watch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main event to begin. I lifted the platter with both hands. Its weight was nothing compared to the weight of the life I had been enduring, but it felt like the most beautiful burden I had ever carried. Taking a deep breath, and with an expressionless face, I kicked open the kitchen door. In the dining room, the 3 of them were already sitting meekly around the table. Their faces looked impatient. Silverware was already in their hands, ready to devour whatever meal I served. When they saw me emerge with the large covered platter, Sharon's eyes lit up. "That's more like it," Sharon said, readjusting herself in her seat with a sarcastic tone. A wife should be efficient. Not just earning money, but also prioritizing the stomachs of her husband and in-laws. Matt huffed his sullen face, still reflecting his earlier anger. "Took you long enough. I hope it's as good as the time we've waited." If it's gross, get ready to make it again. Tiffany even craned her neck. What is it, Valerie? I can't smell anything from here. You didn't just make some instant soup, did you? I didn't say a word. I placed the platter in the center of the table slowly, with a majestic gesture. The sound of the platter touching the glass table silenced them for a moment. I stood tall at the head of the table, looking at them one by one, with a gaze that made even Matt feel a little intimidated. He probably sensed a drastic change in my aura. Go ahead, help yourselves, I said briefly. This is the best dish I can offer you tonight. Eat it all up. Impatient Matt reached out and roughly lifted the silver lid. The clatter of the lid hitting the table echoed loudly in the eerie silence that suddenly fell over the room. There was no hot steam, no smell of spices to whet the appetite. On the platter, there was only a pile of papers. Matt's eyes widened as he saw the papers. He squinted, trying to read the lettering on the top document. His face, once red with anger, turned pale as he recognized the logo and title at the top of the paper. What is all this? His voice trembled, not with anger but with confusion and a dawning panic. Sharon, with her reading glasses, snatched the thickest stack of papers. Where's the food? Why are you giving us newspapers? Have you gone crazy, Valerie? But when she saw the figures highlighted in fluorescent marker on the bank statements, her eyes bulged. What is this? Tiffany, who grasped the situation faster, grabbed the divorce petition, glanced at it, and looked at me with her mouth agape. Matt, she wants a divorce, she shrieked. The atmosphere exploded. Matt threw the house deed he was holding onto the table, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at my face. Divorce papers. Who the hell do you think you are to divorce me? And this is the house deed. Why is it only in your name? Where's mine? Did you trick me? I smiled. A very sweet, but cold and piercing smile. Enjoy your reality, Matt. Sharon. Tiffany. Fill your stomachs by looking at those numbers. That's how much of my money you've been wasting, I said, staring directly into Matt's eyes. This house is legally and morally mine. I put the original documents in a bank safe deposit box this morning. That's just a copy, so tearing it up will do you no good. Then I turned my gaze to Sharon, who was beginning to tremble as she held the bank statements. And, as of this moment, I'm kicking all of you out of my house. By what right do you kick us out? Sharon shrieked, her voice so sharp it made my ears ring. This is my son's house. Matt is the head of the family. You're just a freeloader. Head of the family, I chuckled. A pathetic-sounding laugh. What kind of head of the family feeds his family with his wife's money? What kind of head of the family lets his mother insult his wife? You should know, Sharon, that Matt hasn't contributed a single dollar to this household in over a year. Even the electricity bill that's lighting up your face right now is paid by me, Matt growled. His hands clenched into fists, as if ready to strike me again. He rounded the table and approached me, his intent to harm obvious. You insolent bitch. If you don't take back what you said, you'll what I challenged him. I didn't take a single step back. Instead, I lifted my chin, provoking him. Hit me again. Go ahead. The security camera in the corner up there already recorded you slapping me in the living room earlier. If you lay another hand on me, that recording will automatically be sent to the cloud and to my lawyer's phone. In addition to the divorce petition, do you want a bonus charge of domestic assault? Matt's steps halted abruptly. He looked up and saw the small camera blinking with a red light in the corner of the room. His face twisted into a mixture of fear and extreme hatred. He realized he had walked right into my trap. Get out, I said coldly. Right now. The silence my threat had created lasted only a few seconds before it shattered into a deafening uproar. Sharon was the first to lose her composure. The old woman who always maintained an elegant image in front of her social club friends was now screaming like a madwoman. With her wrinkled hands, she swept all the papers off the table, scattering them across the floor. Her face was streaked with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. She felt humiliated by the daughter-in-law she had considered a walking ATM. She couldn't accept the reality that her luxurious life was about to vanish. Sharon pounded the table repeatedly with her palms, her voice cracking as she accused me of being a first-class con artist. She claimed I had manipulated Matt, used some kind of black magic, or stolen his assets while he wasn't looking. The accusations were ridiculous. How could I con Matt when he had no assets to begin with? From the spoons and forks in this house to the car in the garage, everything was bought with my hard work. But logic no longer seemed to work for them, mired in the panic of losing their meal ticket. Matt, who had been momentarily cowed by the camera threat, now started pacing the dining room like a caged beast. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. He picked up the copy of the house deed from the floor, crumpled it into a ball and threw it at me. The paper ball hit my shoulder harmlessly and bounced off, but it showed just how powerless he felt. He realized he had no legal ground to stand on. The documents were real, the proof of transfers was clear, and he knew damn well he'd been living off my money. The immature Tiffany reacted differently, but just as irritatingly. Instead of screaming or throwing a tantrum, she clutched the designer handbag she had just bought last week, with my credit card, of course, and started sobbing hysterically. She clung to her brother, begging him to do something. She was terrified of being homeless, of not being able to show off on social media anymore, of her friends finding out she wasn't actually rich. Her sobs gave me a headache, but at the same time they brought me a strange satisfaction. Finally, the little girl was afraid for her future. The same fear that had always tormented me whenever I saw the credit card bills inflated by her spending. I let them vent for a few minutes. I stood at the end of the table with my arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle of a family of parasites crumbling. When I felt it was enough, I walked to a corner of the room. There, hidden behind the long window curtains, I had stashed something. I pulled out 3 large black trash bags stuffed to the brim. They were industrial-sized bags. I dragged them to the center of the room. The sound of plastic scraping against the tile floor made them turn their heads. With all my strength, I threw the bags at them one by one. Thump, thump, thump. The 3 large bags landed right at their feet. Matt jumped back in fright. Sharon stopped screaming, and Tiffany momentarily stopped crying. They stared at the trash bags with confused expressions. A faint smell of mothballs and dust wafted from them. "That's your stuff," I said, in a flat, emotionless voice. "I already packed it all this afternoon while you were at the mall." I threw in the clothes, pants, shoes, and personal items I thought were important. The rest of the things, the ones I consider trash or things I bought with my money that you don't deserve to take, I've already thrown in the dumpster out front or set aside to sell secondhand. No need to go up to your rooms to pack. Your rooms are already locked and I've thrown away the keys. You no longer have access to any part of this house except this dining room and the front door." Tiffany shrieked and immediately tore open one of the plastic bags. The contents spilled out. Wrinkled clothes shoved in haphazardly, a pair of shoes stacked without a box, cosmetics scattered without a case. She cried even harder, seeing her collection of expensive clothes treated like kitchen garbage. She protested that folding them like that would ruin them, but I didn't care. To me, they were just trash that needed to be taken out of my house as soon as possible. Sharon looked at me in disbelief, as if I had just turned into a monster. She clutched her chest and pretended to have a heart attack. She gasped for air, hoping I would soften and call off the eviction. In the past, this trick always worked. Whenever I got angry, she would feign illness and I would immediately apologize and care for her. But this time, I just looked at her coldly. I knew the results of her latest medical checkup from last month. Her heart was perfectly healthy. The only thing sick was her heart full of envy and jealousy. Matt tried to approach me again, this time with a fake pleading tone. He lowered his voice and tried to take my hand, but I snatched it away. He started rambling about the sweet memories of our marriage, the sacred vows we once made, the gossip the neighbors would spread if we divorced. He tried to manipulate my emotions using his old weapons, compassion, and the fear of social shame. But he forgot that a woman's heart repeatedly wounded eventually hardens into rock. There were no cracks left for Matt to slip through. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes had passed since I gave them the ultimatum. I took my phone out of my pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and showed them the screen with the emergency call button connected to the community's security gate. I looked at Matt sternly and gave him one final non-negotiable warning. My patience has run out, and I don't want to waste any more time on this cheap drama. Take those trash bags and get out of my house. Now, my order was final. I'm going to count to 10. If you're still here, I'm pressing this button. The community security guards will come and forcibly remove you. Imagine the shame of being dragged out like thieves in front of the neighbors. The choice is yours. Leave on your own 2 feet, with what little dignity you have left, or be forcibly evicted, while the whole neighborhood enjoys the free show. 1, 2, 3, Matt froze. His face was ashen. He searched my eyes for hesitation but found none. He saw a killer's sincerity. With trembling hands, he grabbed one of the large plastic bags. He yelled at Tiffany to stop crying and help him move their things. He also helped his mother, who was still faking breathlessness, to her feet. They finally realized I wasn't bluffing. The queen of the house had awakened, and her orders were absolute. The front door swung open, revealing the dense darkness of the night. A strong wind blew in, carrying with it raindrops that were beginning to fall heavily. Nature, as if supporting my plan to cleanse this house of filth, unleashed a sudden storm the moment they stepped out. In the distance, a clap of thunder rumbled as if marking the rhythm of my heart, which was pounding with adrenaline. I stood on the threshold to make sure they really left with the trash bags containing their meager possessions. Matt went first, a large black plastic bag slung over his shoulder. He looked like a defeated man, a far cry from the arrogant husband who had slapped me. His shirt was soaked from the splashing rain, his hair was limp, and his face was bowed to hide his rage and shame. Behind him, Tiffany reluctantly dragged her plastic bag. She occasionally muttered a curse when the end of the bag snagged on the pavement. Sharon walked unsteadily, carrying nothing. She tried to maintain what little dignity she had left by walking with her chin held high, even as her body began to shiver from the night wind. The moment Sharon's last foot crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. Boom! The sound of the door closing was the signal of the end of a dark chapter in my life. I immediately engaged the double lock and threw the deadbolt. I heard loud pounding on the door from outside. A few seconds later, Matt was screaming my name, hurling insults that then turned into pleas. His voice sounded faint, drowned out by the increasingly intense rain. I didn't move. I went to the front window and, pulling the curtain aside, slightly peeked outside. In the yard, the three of them were shivering in the cold. The rain was coming down harder, drenching them in an instant. The trash bags were now soaked and looked even more pathetic. Matt kept pounding on the door, hoping I would soften at the sight of their state, but he was mistaken. Seeing them soaked seemed to wash away the wounds in my heart. How many times had they left me alone in the rain, waiting for an Uber after work, while Matt took my car to go have fun with his friends? Now let them feel the cold rain down to their bones. The commotion in front of my house eventually caught the neighbors' attention. The porch lights of the houses to the right and left began to turn on. Some neighbors opened their windows or stepped onto their porches to see what was happening. Realizing he had an audience, Matt immediately changed his strategy. He no longer hurled insults, but began to shout in a pitiful voice, trying to portray himself as a victim. He yelled to the neighbors that I was a heartless wife who had thrown her sick husband and mother-in-law out in the middle of the night. He acted like an innocent victim, hoping the neighbors' sympathy would make me open the door. Help us please, my wife has gone crazy, my mother has a heart condition, don't let us die out here," Matt cried, pointing at the front door. Sharon, with her strong, dramatic instinct, immediately collapsed onto the wet porch floor and pretended to faint. Tiffany also sat beside her and started shaking her mother's body while crying loudly, creating a dramatic scene. Some neighbors began to murmur. I saw the HOA president, who lived 3 houses down, approaching with an umbrella. I knew I couldn't let Matt distort the facts. I grabbed my phone and called the community security gate. After 2 rings, I heard the deep voice of the head of security, Mr. Evans. I asked Mr. Evans and his team to come to my house immediately because there was a disturbance disrupting public order. I explained that some strangers were causing a scene on my porch and disturbing the peace. Shortly after, 2 patrol cars with flashing blue lights appeared. Mr. Evans and 2 of his men got out quickly. They approached the porch where the drama of Matt's family was in full swing. I mustered the courage to open the door just enough to speak with Mr. Evans without Matt being able to force his way in. "Mr. Evans, please handle these people," I said loudly so my voice could be heard over the rain and reach the gossiping neighbors. "These people are no longer residents of this house. We have separated, and this house is my exclusive property as stated in the property records. They are trying to force their way in and causing a scene that is disturbing the neighbors. Please escort them off the property." Matt's jaw dropped. He tried to defend himself to Mr. Evans. "Sir, this is my house. My wife is just upset right now. Don't listen to her." But Mr. Evans was a professional security guard who had worked here for a long time. He knew perfectly well who paid the monthly community fees and utility bills on time. It was me, not Matt. He had also seen Matt come home drunk many times or bring friends over and throw loud parties that drew complaints from the neighbors. Mr. Evans's sympathy was clearly not with Matt. "I'm sorry, Mr. Matthews. Mrs. Valerie is the legal owner of this home, and she has requested that you leave. Please do not disturb the other residents at this hour, Mr. Evans said firmly, taking Matt by the arm. "We will escort you to the main gate." Matt tried to resist, but the strength of the 2 burly security guards was far greater. Sharon, who had been pretending to be unconscious, suddenly regained consciousness and stood up, afraid the guards would forcibly remove her. They were escorted out of the yard like prisoners. Matt's face was now red with shame from being the spectacle for the neighbors who looked on with contempt. His performance as an aggrieved husband had completely failed. When they reached the street gate, Matt suddenly stopped as if he remembered something. He turned around and shouted at me, still standing on the threshold. "The car keys." "Where are the car keys?" "My wallet and the car keys are still inside." "Throw me the keys, at least let me take the car." I smirked and slowly shook my head. I stepped forward a bit so he could see my face clearly under the porch light. "The car. Which car are you referring to, Matt?" "The black SUV. I feigned innocence. "In case you didn't know, that car is in my name. And I paid the last installment last month with my bonus, so it's my car. I've hidden the keys where you'll never find them. You don't have a single millimeter of right to that car. But I need the car. Where do you expect us to go in this rain?" Matt shouted in frustration, his voice cracking between claps of thunder. "That's no longer my problem," I replied coldly. "Walk. The exercise will do you good, you've hardly moved lately. Or call an Uber. Oh, wait, I forgot. You left your wallet inside. And all the credit cards in that wallet are my supplementary cards, which I canceled from my banking app 5 minutes ago. So that wallet is useless to you." Matt was speechless. His face was ashen. He realized how perfectly his ruin had been orchestrated. No house, no car, and not a single cent. Mr. Evans gestured for his men to keep moving them along. "That's enough, sir, let's go." "Don't bother Mrs. Valerie anymore," the guard chided Matt. Sharon and Tiffany finally accepted that they were being expelled from the luxurious home where they had lived like parasites. They stumbled under the torrential rain, dragging the black trash bags that were now their only possessions. I closed the door again and threw the deadbolt. Outside, the rain continued to pour, but inside my house, the atmosphere felt so peaceful and warm. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had truly come home. I felt a heavy burden lift from my shoulders. I leaned my back against the door, sighed deeply, and smiled. Tonight, I would sleep soundly. Very soundly. The gate of the luxurious community closed firmly behind them, a wall separating the comfortable life they had just left from the hellish world that now awaited them. The rain didn't stop. On the contrary, it intensified, accompanied by an icy wind that chilled them to the bone. Matt, Sharon, and Tiffany stood shivering on the empty sidewalk. The only roof protecting them was the leafy trees lining the street, which let even more drops fall. They looked like sewer rats swept away by the current, wet, dirty, and miserable. The black trash bags, their only possessions, felt heavier and heavier as rainwater seeped through the poorly tied openings. They walked aimlessly on the flooded sidewalk. The dim light from the street lamps illuminated their desperate faces. Matt checked his pants pockets over and over, hoping for a miracle in the form of a forgotten bill or a debit card that had been spared. But no luck. His pockets were empty. His expensive leather wallet containing his ID, driver's license, debit, and credit cards was left on the nightstand in the bedroom. Valerie had calculated everything meticulously. Without that wallet, Matt was a nobody. He couldn't rent a hotel room, buy food, or even a hot tea from a street vendor. His identity and financial access were now locked away in the house he was forbidden from entering. Sharon began to grow delirious from the cold. Her teeth chattered, and her lips started to turn blue. The woman who always maintained an impeccable appearance with thick makeup now looked old and frail. The remnants of makeup streaked by the rain had left black smudges under her eyes, giving her a grotesque appearance. In a cracked voice barely audible over the rain, she blamed Matt. She cursed her son's stupidity for not being able to control his wife. According to Sharon's twisted logic, this all happened not because they had oppressed Valerie for years, but because Matt hadn't been strict enough with her. Tiffany limped behind them. One of the heels of her expensive high-heeled shoes had broken when she stepped into a pothole. Now she had no choice but to hobble, carrying the useless, expensive shoes in her hand. They finally found a strip mall with an awning wide enough to shelter them from the rain, though the store was closed. Without a word, they dropped their exhausted bodies onto the cold, dusty tile floor. Matt leaned against the cold metal security gate. His stomach growled loudly. Hunger began to attack cruelly. The last time they had eaten was at lunch, and tonight they had been expecting the feast Valerie had prepared. Ironically, they had received an unforgettable dinner. Though it wasn't food that could be chewed, the image of a hot plate of pot roast and mashed potatoes now floated before Matt's eyes, torturing him slowly. Tiffany, who took out her phone with its slightly cracked screen, tried to call an Uber with the 10% battery she had left, but her fingers stopped over the screen. She realized the payment method on the app was directly linked to Valerie's supplementary credit card. With trembling hands, she tried to book a ride, and as expected, a transaction failed notification appeared on the screen. Valerie had blocked everything. Tiffany called her high society friends for help. The first call went unanswered. The second was rejected. The third call was answered by a friend, Sasha. But as soon as Tiffany told her she'd been kicked out and needed to borrow money, Sasha made an excuse about having a bad signal and hung up. Frustrated, Tiffany threw her phone on the ground, hugged her knees, and cried bitterly. That night was terribly long and painful. They couldn't sleep a wink. Mosquitoes started biting their damp skin. Every now and then, a passing car would startle them. Each time a luxury car drove by, Matt's heart sank. He remembered his black SUV now resting comfortably in Valerie's garage. In the silence of the night as dawn approached, Sharon moaned, clutching her stomach, which was cramping from indigestion and hunger. There was no medicine, no blankets, no hot water. Matt could only look at his mother with an empty gaze. Guilt started to creep in, but his enormous ego quickly pushed it away, replacing it with hatred for Valerie. He swore he would get revenge as soon as the sun came up. The morning brought a bright sun, but it didn't warm their hearts. Their bodies were stiff and sore in every joint. A musty smell emanated from their dry clothes. Passers-by looked at them with disgust, thinking they were the area's new homeless people. A shopkeeper coming to open his store shooed them away, throwing a bucket of water at their feet to make them move. With what little dignity they had left, they moved their things to a park bench not far away. As they sat on the park bench, enduring the growing hunger, Tiffany distractedly opened her social media with the little data she had left. Her eyes widened as she saw an Instagram story from Valerie that had just been posted 15 minutes ago. Tiffany showed the phone screen to Matt and Sharon. On the screen, with the background of a clean, elegant apartment dining table, was a photo of a bowl of special chicken noodle soup with abundant ingredients and a cup of hot tea. In the corner of the photo was a small caption. "The best breakfast is a parasite-free breakfast. A blessing to be grateful for." Seeing the photo, Matt's stomach churned violently, not just from hunger but from the envy and rage exploding in his chest. While they were suffering on the street like trash, Valerie was enjoying her life. The reality without his wife's wallet was terrible. The world was no longer kind, and they were nothing but worthless dust. Matt decided he couldn't give up like this. He still had a job. Yes, he was still the marketing team lead at an office supply distribution company, though his position wasn't very important and his salary was tight, often squandered on small online bets he made behind Valerie's back. He thought that if he could get to the office, he could ask for a salary advance or borrow money from a colleague to at least get a cheap room for his mother and sister. He had to save the last shred of prestige he had left as a man. He left Sharon and Tiffany at the park, promising to return at lunchtime with money and food. Adventurously, Matt walked the 2 miles to his office. He stopped by a public restroom to wash his face and fix his messy hair. He couldn't get the musty smell out of his very wrinkled shirt, but at least he cleaned his muddy shoes with a wet paper towel. He looked too pathetic to be a team lead, but he had no other choice. Upon arriving at the office lobby, the receptionist looked at him with a frown. Normally, Matt came to work in impeccable clothes, expensive cologne, and a stylish look that Valerie had helped him create. Today, he looked like he had just survived a natural disaster. Matt ignored the strange look and went straight to the elevator. Inside the elevator, 2 employees from another department discreetly covered their noses and whispered to each other while glancing at Matt. Matt pretended not to see them and stared straight ahead with a stoic face. His heart was pounding. He was afraid the secret of his poverty would be exposed. As soon as he reached his desk, before he could even sit down, an HR employee was standing there with a serious face. "Mr. Matthews, the director and the head of HR are waiting for you in the meeting room right now," the employee said without smiling. Matt's mood instantly soured. Normally, these sudden calls were not a good sign. With hesitant steps, he followed the employee to the meeting room at the end of the hall. Inside, the director and the head of HR were waiting for him with a stack of documents on the table. Their faces were cold and showed no kindness. Matt sat in the indicated chair and, despite his trembling lips, tried to force a friendly smile. "What's wrong, mister? Director Sir, you called for me so urgently this morning," he asked, feigning ignorance. The director threw a blue folder at Matt. "No need for excuses. We've been conducting an internal audit for a week and have found numerous irregularities in the financial reports of the marketing team you lead." Matt's heart seemed to stop. With sweaty hands, he opened the folder. Inside was evidence of embezzlement of operating funds, falsification of gas receipts, and even inflated expenses for client dinners that never happened. All this time, Matt had been siphoning off company money to cover his personal expenses or pay his gambling debts. Before, whenever there was a cash discrepancy, Valerie, who worked as a CPA at a prestigious accounting firm that was the external audit consultant for this company, would fix the reports or even cover the deficit with her own money to protect her husband's career. Valerie had done it to save her husband's face, but now that protective shield was gone. Valerie was no longer covering up the skeletons Matt was hiding. On the contrary, perhaps she was the one who tipped off the internal audit team to investigate Matt's department more thoroughly. I can explain, Mr. Director. It's just a clerical error. Matt excused himself nervously. Cold sweat started to run down his temples. A clerical error, scoffed the head of HR. $50,000 has gone missing in 6 months, and you call that a clerical error? We've checked with the restaurants and gas stations you attached. All these receipts are fake. And what's worse, we've also received information that you've been using company property for personal purposes. Mr. Matthews, the director, interrupted with a loud, firm voice. The company cannot tolerate this type of criminal behavior. As of today, you are terminated with cause. You will not be paid a single cent of severance, because the company's losses are greater than what you are owed. And one more thing, if you don't return that $50,000 within 48 hours, we will pursue this legally. The police will come looking for you. Matt's world collapsed in an instant. Fired for cause, no severance, threat of jail time. He slumped in his chair. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. It was over. His only lifeline had just been cut. He tried to beg, even got on his knees at the director's feet, and cried, forgetting his pride, but the decision was firm. 2 security guards were called to escort Matt out of the building. The scene of the previous night's eviction was repeated. This time at his workplace, Matt was dragged between the desks of his colleagues who looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disgust. The whispers were loud. The news of his corruption spread like wildfire. He was forced to pack his personal belongings into a cardboard box. He didn't have many valuable things at his desk, just a photo of himself posing like a successful man. When Matt walked out of the office building lobby with the box in his hands, his eyes caught a sight that squeezed his chest and made it hard to breathe. A luxurious silver sedan pulled up right in front of the VIP lobby of the building next door, a much more prestigious business center. The car door opened, and the figure of a woman he knew very well emerged. It was Valerie, but this Valerie looked very different. She was wearing an elegant, modern business suit. Her hair was impeccably styled, and she wore sunglasses that gave her a very distinguished air. She walked with confidence, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying briefcases. Valerie was on her way to a meeting with an important client. Her career was on a steep upward trajectory. Matt wanted to scream his wife's name. He wanted to run to her, but his feet felt as heavy as lead. He saw his reflection in the building's glass, disheveled, dirty, smelly, and holding an old box. In contrast, Valerie shone like a diamond freshly cleaned of mud. At that moment, Valerie glanced in his direction. Behind those dark sunglasses, Matt felt a sharp, penetrating gaze. Valerie didn't stop, didn't greet him, didn't even show a flicker of surprise. She simply turned her head and continued on her way into the skyscraper, leaving Matt frozen like a true loser on the hot sidewalk. The collapse of Matt's career was the piece that perfectly completed his suffering, while the woman he had abandoned was now flying so high she was unreachable. Matt returned to the park with heavy steps, as if carrying a ton of weight on his feet. The midday sun was scorching, burning the back of his neck, unprotected by the collar of his now dirty, sweat-smelling shirt. He clutched the box of his office belongings, a symbol of his failure that he would now have to carry everywhere. Along the way, his stomach wouldn't stop rumbling, twisting in pain and begging to be filled. But that hunger was nothing compared to the fear that now gripped his throat. He had to face his mother and sister with no money, no food, and worst of all, the news that he was now an unemployed man with a criminal record at his company. When he reached the park, he was met with a miserable scene. Sharon and Tiffany were huddled on a park bench with peeling paint. They looked like wilted plants forcibly uprooted from the earth. Sharon was massaging her swollen legs while Tiffany fanned her face with a piece of torn cardboard, a look of annoyance and disgust on her face. When they saw Matt appear in the distance, their faces lit up for a moment. The hope of a sandwich and fresh water shone clearly in their eyes. Tiffany even forgot the pain in her legs and stood up to greet her brother, holding out her hands as if asking for her share. But that hope vanished when Matt arrived and dropped the box he was carrying onto the ground with a dull, miserable thud. Matt didn't dare look them in the eyes. He lowered his head and stared at his once shiny shoes now covered in street dust. In a choked voice, Matt confessed everything. He told them about his firing, the company audit, that revealed his misdeeds, the threat of jail time if he didn't return the money, and the fact that he hadn't received a single cent of severance. For a moment, a deathly silence fell over the three of them, a stark contrast to the noisy traffic on the road behind the park. And then, the crying and rage erupted. Sharon screamed hysterically, not caring about the people passing by. She beat Matt's arm with what little strength she had left, blaming her pride and joy for being so careless and stupid. She lamented her fate having to be homeless at her age, comparing her life to that of her social club friends who at that hour were probably napping in an air-conditioned room. A torrent of unfiltered insults poured from Sharon's mouth. The same harsh words she used to direct at Valerie were now vomited entirely onto Matt. Tiffany was no less cruel. She kicked the box of Matt's things, spilling the contents. She insulted her brother, calling him a useless man who only brought trouble to the family. In this desperate situation, the mask of a united family they had so often boasted about to Valerie completely crumbled. There was no more affection or mutual support, only the selfish survival instinct of each individual. They blamed each other for the sudden poverty that had befallen them. Tiffany blamed Matt for embezzling funds. Matt blamed Tiffany and Sharon for pushing him to embezzle with their luxurious lifestyle. And Sharon blamed both of them for not finding rich spouses to take care of their lives. When the fight which had left them exhausted and even hungrier subsided, Matt made a desperate decision. He took off the luxury watch he wore on his wrist, the only valuable item he had left that Valerie hadn't confiscated because he was wearing it when she kicked them out. He also forcefully demanded the gold earrings Tiffany was wearing. Although Tiffany resisted and screamed, Matt and Sharon forced her using the excuse that it was to buy food and rent a cheap room. Finally, with a face full of anger and resentment, Tiffany handed over the earrings. Matt went to a pawn shop some distance from the park and sold the watch and earrings to a street buyer. Since he didn't have the certificate of authenticity and needed the money urgently, the items were sold for a price far below their original value. Matt had no choice but to accept an amount of cash sufficient for a few simple meals for a few days and to rent a cramped room in a dirty neighborhood for a week. That afternoon, they rented a room by the day in a narrow, muddy alley that smelled of sewage. The room was tiny, barely fitting a thin foam mattress that sagged in the middle. The walls were damp and moldy, and there were no windows, just a small vent above the door. The bathroom was outside and shared with other tenants who eyed them suspiciously. For Sharon and Tiffany, accustomed to Valerie's fragrant and clean luxury home, this place was hell. Sharon constantly complained about the musty smell, the cockroaches, the hot air with only a small dusty fan. That night they had cheap takeout for dinner. The atmosphere was grim without conversation. They ate greedily because they were hungry, but their faces were filled with mutual hatred. After dinner, Matt tucked the remaining money from the sale of the watch and earrings under his pillow, intending to keep it safe. He planned to use that money as capital to look for odd jobs the next day. Physical and mental exhaustion caused Matt and Sharon to fall asleep quickly on the thin mattress, snoring. However, Tiffany did not sleep. Her eyes stared at the ceiling full of cobwebs. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She looked with disgust at her mother and brother, who were sleeping with their mouths open. She felt she didn't deserve to be in this filthy place. She thought she was still young, beautiful, and deserved to live comfortably. She hated Matt for not being a support, and felt the burden of having to care for her mother, who was beginning to get sick from the stress. A demonic whisper began to infiltrate her mind. If she stayed with them, the money would be gone in a week, and they would starve together. But if she took the money for herself, maybe she could run away to another city, find an old friend or another man to leech off of. Slowly, with very careful movements, so as not to make the mattress creak, Tiffany slid her hand under Matt's pillow. Her heart pounded. She felt the envelope with the money and slowly pulled it out. Matt shifted slightly in his sleep and Tiffany froze in fear. But Matt just changed his position and started snoring again. Tiffany managed to get the envelope. She immediately put it in her purse and quietly packed her clothes into the black plastic bag. Without a second glance at her mother and brother who had betrayed her, Tiffany slipped out of the room and disappeared into the darkness of the narrow alley, taking the family's only hope of survival with her. The next morning, Matt's scream shattered the silence of that dirty alley. He woke up to find nothing under his pillow. The money was gone. He looked around. Tiffany and her things were also gone. Sharon was startled awake by Matt's scream. When Matt told her that Tiffany had run off with all their money, Sharon at first didn't believe it. She refused, saying her darling daughter couldn't be so cruel. But the truth was obvious. The door wasn't forced and there were no signs of a break-in. It was clearly someone from inside. Sharon burst into tears. This time her crying was truly heartbroken. She screamed Tiffany's name, the daughter she had always spoiled. The daughter who now abandoned her like trash to save herself. Matt, his emotions on edge, flew into a rage. He punched the damp wall of the room, bloodying his hand. He cursed Tiffany with harsh words. The pain of being betrayed by his own blood was far more painful than being kicked out by his wife. At least Valerie had a clear reason to hate them. But Tiffany was one of them. Now one parasite was eating another. Their ruin became even more complete when the landlord came knocking. He was angry because the early morning commotion was disturbing the other tenants. Seeing Matt out of his mind, the landlord got scared and kicked them out immediately. The week's rent had been stolen by Tiffany, and it turned out Matt hadn't paid it in full yet, only giving a deposit the night before. They were kicked out again. This time, they had absolutely nothing left. Absolute zero. Sharon walked unsteadily with a lost look in her eyes. The severe shock of her daughter's betrayal caused her health to deteriorate drastically. Her face was pale, and she was sweating cold. Matt had to support his mother as they walked down the hot street. In the midst of extreme desperation, Matt remembered the one place that was once his home. A foolish hope arose in his mind that maybe Valerie had calmed down. Maybe Valerie would feel compassion seeing the state of his mother who looked like a walking corpse. With his last remaining strength, Matt supported his mother and walked several miles back to the luxurious community where Valerie lived. When they arrived, the sun was about to set. They looked like beggars. The security guard at the main gate recognized them and looked at them suspiciously. But Matt pleaded, saying he wouldn't go in. He just wanted to see the house from a distance. Matt stood on the other side of the street facing his old house. The house looked dark and quiet. Valerie's car was not in the garage. The garden was clean and the lawn was manicured. But there was one thing that made Matt's knees buckle instantly. In front of the house's fence was a large sign, a striking yellow sign with big red letters that said, "For sale, urgent. Contact number X." Matt's hope was shattered. Valerie had not only kicked them out, but she was selling the house full of memories to erase any trace of them from her life. The house was empty. Valerie was gone, taking her success and happiness with her, leaving Matt and his mother truly alone in this cruel world. Matt collapsed onto the asphalt and, hugging his mother's knees, cried silently in the shadow of the house he had once abandoned. For Valerie, the days after kicking out, Matt and his family were filled with a healing silence. There were no more morning shouts for coffee, no blaring TV with Sharon's favorite soap operas, and no complaints that the food was too salty or the clothes weren't ironed properly. The house became so quiet she could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of the wind rustling the trees in the backyard. At first, the silence felt strange, but it slowly became a comforting blanket she had missed for the past 5 years. The first step Valerie took to put her life in order was to clean the house literally and figuratively. She hired a professional cleaning company to scrub every corner, throw out any of Matt's belongings that might have been left behind, and replace the sheets, curtains, and even the rugs the family had walked on. She wanted to erase their footprints and their scent, the smell of Matt's cigarettes and Sharon's cloying perfume from her sacred space. After the house was clean, Valerie immediately contacted a trusted real estate agent. She decided to sell the house. Although the house was the fruit of her blood, sweat, and tears, its walls held too many bad memories. She needed a completely fresh start in a place where there were no memories of slaps or insults. The selling process was quick. Its prime location and excellent condition attracted many potential buyers. Within 2 weeks, the house was sold for a satisfying price. With the money from the sale plus her savings, which were now intact, no longer devoured by parasites, Valerie bought a penthouse apartment in the city center. The apartment was smaller than the old house, but far more luxurious, modern, and with a very strict security system. From the windows of her 30th floor apartment, she could see the twinkling city lights at night, a landscape that symbolized her bright future. Valerie's career also took off like a rocket. Without the headaches and drama that consumed her emotions, she could focus 100% on her work. The major audit project she was leading was completed with excellent results well ahead of the deadline. The client was extremely satisfied with her meticulous and professional work. The head of the accounting firm did not hesitate to promote Valerie to senior partner. This promotion came with new perks, a more luxurious company car, a personal assistant, and of course a much higher income. Valerie now looked different. She changed her style of dress. The old dresses she used to wear for fear Matt would get angry if she bought new clothes were now donated. She filled her new wardrobe with elegant business suits from a famous national designer. Her face, once tired and dull, now glowed thanks to regular skincare, and most importantly, a happy heart. Her colleagues often told her that after her divorce, Valerie looked 10 years younger. For Valerie, divorce wasn't a shame or a failure but an operation to remove a malignant tumor that had saved her life. The divorce proceedings in family court were much simpler than she had imagined. Since Matt had no fixed address and failed to appear for any of the court summonses, the notices were sent to the old house address. However, Matt wasn't there and didn't respond to the public notices in the media. The judge issued a default judgment. Valerie officially became a divorced woman in a short time. When the judge's gavel struck, Valerie didn't cry. On the contrary, she smiled in relief and thanked God in her heart several times. She walked out of the courthouse with a light step as if the chains that had bound her feet had been broken. That night in her new lavender-scented apartment, Valerie sat comfortably on the imported leather sofa and enjoyed a cup of hot herbal tea. While reading a bestseller, her phone vibrated on the marble table. She received a message from an unknown number. Normally, Valerie ignored messages from unknown numbers, but for some reason her intuition told her to open it. The message was short, but full of desperation. "Valerie, it's Matt. I borrowed someone's phone at a shop. Please, Valerie, your mother-in-law is very sick. We're sleeping under a storefront. Tiffany ran off with our money. I feel like I'm going to die if this keeps up. I'll change, I promise. Please let us come back. Do you still have any love left for me?" Valerie read the message with an expressionless face. She felt no compassion, no urge to help. The only thing she felt was disgust and a slight irritation at having her peace disturbed. She remembered the time Matt left her alone at home with a high fever to go fishing with his friends. She remembered the time Sharon threw her food in the trash just because the seasoning was too mild. She remembered Matt's last slap. Love. That love had been murdered several times over by their actions. Valerie slowly set down her teacup. She didn't reply with angry words or wise advice. Matt no longer deserved her emotional energy. To Valerie, Matt was a closed past, a book that had been shut and burned. With firm fingers, Valerie pressed the block button for that number and then deleted the message from her inbox so there would be no digital trash to dirty her phone. She stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city skyline at night. She saw the thousands of lights twinkling below. She imagined that in some dark corner of that city, Matt might be crying, lamenting his fate. But that was no longer Valerie's concern. Every adult is responsible for their own choices in life. Matt chose to be a lazy oppressor when he had everything, so now he had to face the consequences of being a loser when he had lost it all. Valerie took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air of freedom. She felt whole, complete, and strong. She realized she didn't need a man to be happy. Happiness was within herself and her ability to stand on her own 2 feet, in her quiet life of faith, and in the legitimate income she earned. That night, Valerie slept very soundly in her plush king-sized bed, wrapped in a soft silk comforter. There were no more nightmares, no fear of tomorrow. She knew that the morning sun would rise brighter, illuminating the path of her new life clean of parasites, the path to true happiness that she herself had created. She had managed to turn pain into strength, and her best revenge was becoming so successful and happy that the existence of her betrayers no longer mattered. Time passed cruelly for those unprepared for life's hardships. 6 months had passed since the night of the eviction. But for Matt, it felt like 6 centuries filled with suffering. He now lived in a miserable room in a densely populated area on the outskirts of the city, with very poor sanitary conditions. The walls of his room were made of thin, rotting plywood, eaten away by termites. The roof leaked everywhere and the floor was just cold, rough cement. There was no soft mattress. An old mat was his bed each night. The pungent smell of sewers and the noise of neighbors frequently fighting was the daily routine they had to swallow. Sharon's condition worsened drastically after Tiffany ran off with their money. The severe shock and mental pressure caused her health to collapse completely. The woman who once held her chin high and always acted arrogantly now just lay helplessly on the mat. She had suffered a mild stroke that paralyzed the right side of her body. Her mouth was slightly twisted, and her speech was slurred and difficult to understand. There were no more consultations with expensive doctors or patented medicines. Matt could only afford generic drugs from the store or cheap medicinal herbs he prepared himself. Every night, Sharon would just moan and stare at the cobweb-filled ceiling with an empty gaze, perhaps regretting her past arrogance, or perhaps still blaming her adverse fate. To make a living, Matt had to cast aside his pride as a former team lead. He worked as a porter at a traditional market 2 miles from his room. Every morning at 3 a.m., when Valerie was probably praying quietly in her luxurious apartment, Matt already had to get up and walk to the market, fighting off sleep. There he carried 100-pound sacks of rice, baskets of vegetables, and crates of fruit. His back, which once only leaned against a soft ergonomic chair, was now full of sores and hunched from the weight of the load. His once well-cared-for skin was now sunburnt, rough, and covered in grime. His once soft hands were now calloused and often injured by wires or wooden boxes. One hot afternoon, the market was suddenly thrown into chaos. As Matt had just unloaded a 100-pound sack of onions from a truck, he heard loud screams coming from the area with jewelry and clothing stores. A market guard's whistle mixed with the shouts of people yelling, "Thief!" At first, Matt didn't care. Crime was common in this market. He just wanted to finish his work, collect his meager wages, and buy food for his hungry mother at home. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his dirty shirt and tried to move away from the crowd to avoid trouble. However, his steps halted when he heard a woman's scream that sounded familiar. The sound was high-pitched and shrill, full of fear and desperation. Curious, Matt mustered the courage to climb onto a dumpster to see the center of the crowd that was delivering mob justice. His heart stopped when he saw the person being dragged by the hair. It was Tiffany, his sister. The girl who once dressed in designer clothes now looked so miserable. Her once long, well-kept hair was now messy and chopped unevenly. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp, and she had a blue bruise on her temple. Her clothes were tattered and dirty. Tiffany was caught red-handed trying to steal a lady's purse while she was shopping for jewelry. The enraged crowd almost lynched her if it hadn't been for the market police who came to stop them. Matt froze on the spot. His legs trembled violently. He wanted to run and help his sister. He wanted to scream that she was his family, but shame and fear stopped him. What could he do? He was just a poor porter, with no power. If he intervened, maybe the angry crowd would beat him too. He watched as Tiffany was handcuffed and put into a police car. Tiffany cried hysterically, calling for her mother, calling for Matt, but her voice was drowned out by the jeers of the market people. Tears streamed down Matt's dirty cheeks. He witnessed the total ruin of his family right before his eyes. Tiffany, who had run off with the money that was their hope for survival for a momentary pleasure, ended up as a captured street thief. The illicit money Tiffany had stolen had probably vanished without a trace, either scammed away or squandered on a lifestyle she couldn't maintain. Matt covered his face with his hands, feeling like a complete failure as a brother and a son. He hid behind a pile of rotten boxes and waited for the police car to take his sister to jail. With a broken heart, Matt went back to his room early. He couldn't work anymore that day. Tiffany's terrified face haunted him. He stumbled through the narrow alley to his home, but the suffering of that day was not yet over. When he reached the door of his room, he saw their belongings, the mat, the old pillow, the small kerosene stove, and a few items of clothing scattered on the ground in front of the door. A burly man with tattoos on his arms stood in front of the door with his arms crossed. It was the landlord. His face was sullen, and he had a thick mustache. Seeing Matt arrive, the man immediately spat on the ground. "Hey Matt, welcome back. Grab your mother who smells like dirt and your junk and get out of here now," the man shouted brusquely. Matt, shocked, pleaded. "Sir, please, sir, give me one more week. I can pay you a little with today's wages." "Bah, just excuses," the man interrupted. "You're already 3 months behind. I've had enough patience. Your mother groans loudly every day and scares the other tenants. And she stinks. I'm renting this room to someone else who has money. Get out quickly or I'll call the neighbors to throw you out." Matt tried to enter the room to see his mother, but the man blocked him. On the narrow porch, Sharon was already sitting in an old plastic chair at the edge of the alley. She looked confused. Drool trickled from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes trembled with fear as she saw people staring at her. Matt felt an extreme tightness in his chest, as if a large stone was crushing his lungs. "Sir, please, my mother is sick." "Where is your conscience?" Matt pleaded, prostrating himself at the landlord's feet and crying bitterly. His pride was completely gone. He was willing to kiss a stranger's feet for a roof over his mother's head. But the man was unmoved. "Conscience doesn't buy rice, friend. Business is business." "Get out," the man said lightly, pushing Matt on the shoulder with his foot. That afternoon, as the sky began to cloud over, Matt helped his paralyzed mother. He carried a bundle of dirty clothes on his back, and with his left hand guided Sharon, who was dragging one leg. They had been kicked out again. This time they had nowhere to go, no savings, no relatives. Tiffany was in jail. They were truly, completely homeless. Matt took his mother and walked aimlessly, looking for a quiet storefront awning or a dry bridge to spend the night. Karma had found them in the cruelest way, repaying them for every tear they had once made Valerie shed. 1 year later, a luxurious banquet hall in the city center was beautifully decorated. Fresh flowers adorned every corner. Chandeliers hung majestically, casting a golden light. Outside the building, dozens of congratulatory wreaths sent by various large companies and local officials were lined up. Today was the grand opening of Valerie's 5th boutique and the launch of the charitable foundation she had created to help women who were victims of domestic violence and to promote economic independence for vulnerable groups. Valerie, on a small stage, cut the opening ribbon with a sincere and charming smile. She wore a fashion creation she had designed, herself a long dress of simple design but radiating a luxurious elegance. Her hair was impeccably styled and her clear, carefree face glowed. The flashes of reporters' cameras continuously captured the image of the woman, who was now an inspiration to many. Valerie was no longer an oppressed, fearful woman. She was a symbol of rebirth and success. After the official ceremony, the social contribution activities continued. Valerie and her team prepared 1,000 deluxe meal boxes and cash aid to be distributed to the poor, who had gathered in the side courtyard of the building. Valerie insisted on distributing the gifts herself. She wanted to see the faces of the beneficiaries share a smile and be grateful for the abundant blessings God had entrusted to her after the storm of her life had passed. The long line of people waiting for aid stretched out neatly. Valerie, with patience, shook each person's hand, handed them the meal box and the envelope, and prayed for them. The smell of sweat and dust from the people in line did not bother Valerie. She continued to smile kindly, her eyes radiating affection. Finally, it was the turn of a gaunt man pushing an old wheelchair. The man wore a t-shirt with holes in the shoulders and pants caked with dirt. His body was just skin and bones. His hair was long, messy, and greasy. A pungent odor emanated from his body, a mixture of garbage and stale sweat from not having seen soap in a long time. In the dilapidated wheelchair he was pushing sat an old woman in a much worse state. The woman was emaciated. Her hair was white and messy, her gaze was empty, and her mouth constantly mumbled without sound. Valerie took a meal box and an envelope and with a kind smile offered them to the man. "Here you go, sir. I hope this is a blessing for you and your mother. Don't forget to pray," Valerie said in her characteristic soft voice. The man did not immediately take the meal box. His dirty, trembling hands paused in midair. He lowered his head. His eyes were fixed on the high-heeled shoes Valerie was wearing. Those shoes. He remembered seeing that model of shoe in a magazine his wife used to read. Slowly, the man lifted his head. His sunken eyes met Valerie's beautiful ones. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The man's mouth opened slightly. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed a bitter lump. Tears immediately filled his cloudy eyes. He recognized that face. The face he had once slapped. The face he had once insulted daily. The face he had once abandoned for his pride. It was Valerie, his wife. The wife who had once served him with all her heart. The wife who had once washed his clothes. The wife who had once taken care of his life. Valerie, the man's voice came out so weak it was barely audible, like the sound of the wind. Valerie was speechless for a moment. She looked closely at the man before her. She saw those eyes, that nose, and the outline of that face. Though covered in dirt and suffering, Valerie recognized who he was. It was Matt. And the old woman in the wheelchair was Sharon. Her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were now before her as beggars waiting for her charity. Valerie's heart beat calmly. There was no outburst of anger, no burning desire for revenge, nor a compassion that would make her cry. Just a flat, empty, strange feeling, as if she were looking at a stranger with no history in her life. Hatred required energy, and Valerie no longer wanted to waste her energy on them. They had already become an irrelevant past. Matt waited for Valerie's reaction. He expected her to get angry, to insult him, or to cry with compassion and hug him. He hoped there was even a little bit of feeling left. Matt wanted to prostrate himself and beg. He wanted to scream that he was sorry. He wanted to tell her how shattered his life was without her. He wanted to tell her he regretted it so much, a regret that had burned him every moment of this past year. But Valerie did none of that. Valerie simply nodded politely. Her professional smile did not change one bit. She placed the meal box and the envelope in Matt's trembling hand and calmly turned her gaze to the next person in line. "Please move along, sir. The line is still long." I feel for the lady waiting behind you, Valerie said softly, but firmly as if speaking to a stranger blocking the way. Matt's heart shattered, more shattered than when he was kicked out of the house. Valerie's indifference was the most painful punishment. He was treated as if he didn't exist. He was considered like the passing wind. Valerie had completely erased him, not just from her life but also from her memory. Valerie had won completely. The woman had closed the book of her past and burned it to ashes. A security guard approached and politely asked Matt to move along as he was holding up the line. Matt, with hesitant steps, pushed his mother's wheelchair and moved away. Sharon, who understood nothing, just reached out for the meal box on Matt's lap. Hungry. Matt stopped on the sidewalk on the other side of the luxurious building. He knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. In the distance, he saw Valerie get into a gleaming black luxury sedan. A personal driver opened the door for her. Valerie got into the car elegantly, without a single backward glance in Matt's direction. The car moved slowly, leaving a faint trail of smoke carrying Valerie away to her glamorous life full of happiness. Matt, with trembling hands, opened the meal box. Inside was white rice, braised ribs, grilled chicken, and fresh vegetables. It was the most luxurious meal he had seen in a year. He fed a spoonful of rice to his mother, who immediately chewed it greedily, and then Matt took a spoonful for himself. The food tasted delicious. It was the best catered food, but on Matt's tongue it tasted like a mixture with the salty tears streaming down his cheeks. He cried bitterly, becoming a spectacle on the crowded sidewalk. He clutched the meal box his ex-wife had given him, as if it were the only link he had left. Regret came too late, far too late. He had thrown away a diamond for a sharp stone, and now that stone was wounding him until he was numb. There was no going back. The door of forgiveness was closed. Not because it was locked, but because the owner of the house had moved to a much more beautiful palace. The story of their lives ends here, at very different points. Valerie flew high on the wings of sincerity and effort, while Matt and his family sank into the quagmire they themselves had created. That day, an absolute truth was proven. The best revenge is not anger or insults, but being so happy, so successful, and so peaceful that the existence of the people who once hurt you no longer matters. Their ruin is just a small footnote in your thick history of success.